Now, how would these engineers, these graduates, build their careers within industry? The first problem is now getting a job. Mostly, this was through personal contacts, as the Eiffel case illustrates. Another method was actual placement by the administration of the school in response to specific requests from industry. A third was through alumni associations, a different kind of contact. And last was the unsolicited letter of application, and the least predictable. According to Grelon, graduates built their careers in basically two ways. One was by starting at the bottom. They put on the workman's overalls. In this way, some were promoted to charge hand or to foreman, and sometimes no further. Others promoted to section manager or to chief engineer, and a few to factory managers. Now, in general, if you had a diploma, you advanced. A second pathway was through the research unit of the firm, when such did exist. Because the research unit functioned simultaneously as a planning department to draft projects, estimates, and reports. It functioned as a laboratory for carrying out research on processes, checking experiments, and analyzing raw materials, products, and even byproducts. And it functioned as a sampling service for the control of quality and prices. The research unit was attractive to these graduates because it was a place for doing basically more theoretical work. And as the career guide put it, quote, "The research unit is the abode of thought. From it, ideas pour forth. It is there that the life of the intellect has its source. It is the working place for engineers." End quote. By the 20th century, however, the research unit was sometimes criticized as being too narrow in almost the state engineer sense. Grelon again, quote, "The atmosphere was said to be too enclosed. Its thinking is inclined to be narrow. Its staff are apt to fall into a habit of thought that sees the workshop, the commercial department, and even customers as existing for its benefit." In other words, in a way, maybe the arrogance of the state engineers was carried over into these research departments in industry. As companies grew in size, other pathways emerged through the commercial department and management. But even here, there was a desire for theory first, or for seeing oneself as applying science. This desire was always evident in textbooks, for example. The close links between the Ecole Centrale and industry are clear even to this day. In a visit to the school, for example, Professor Lucena and I found two contiguous buildings, an industrial lab, which we expected, and a scientific lab, which we found curious. At first, we thought the scientific lab was a site for basic research. Maybe things had changed. But we soon realized in our little tour, self-guided, that the experimentation taking place inside was directly related to specific industrial problems. In a brief chance encounter inside of the building, the director of the lab explained to us that they were working on an experiment sponsored by the government and energy companies to create bacteria that would generate hydrogen. The hydrogen generated by these bacteria would then be stored and used in fuel cells, a potential new source of energy for the power industry. Through the evolution of French industry and of the middle tier of French engineering education, as we've just explored, one can better see why the label engineer marks both an educational credential and a type or rank in one's employment. Since 1934, the title of graduate engineer, ingénieur diplôme, has been controlled and protected by law. Indeed, the Minister of Education has a special committee called the Engineering Title Commission that was created in that year, whose responsibility is to evaluate requests to use this title and generally to guarantee the quality of the educational programs that produce the so-called diplomaed engineers. At the same time, however, nearly half of the people working as engineers in companies don't hold engineering diplomas. The state does not control the naming of an engineer in industry. With this last bit of the story, then, you should now be able to understand the emergence of engineers in France through their location in the midst of two distinct but linked hierarchies. The first is the three-tiered educational system that includes the elite schools at the top, the grandes écoles, the Ecole Centrale in the middle, and the École des Arts et Métiers at the bottom. The second is a hierarchy of workplaces defined in terms of distance from the centralized state apparatus, including the national and the provincial bureaucracies, followed by industrial technologies and firms contributing to the French infrastructure, and then finally industries contributing only, let's say, consumer goods. Depending upon whom you meet, let's say a polytechnician engineer for a state agency or a gazar working as a clerk, the issues you would face in collective problem solving with such a person would vary accordingly.